It's the pop culture field and you will.
Folks, welcome to the Pop Culture Field Manual podcast, sitting right at the intersection of weapons, action, the military, and pop culture. We are happy you are here joining us today because, as always, we love doing this.
Yeah.
We love having you. So today, folk and folks,
Just one.
single folk, plural folk, all the folks in between. We are going to be talking about propaganda, propaganda's use in real life, propaganda's use in Hollywood. I mean, this thing has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And let's get right into it.
Yeah, man.
Are you planning on creating a relentless regime with your ideals hell-bent on world takeover? Well, armies don't just fall out of the sky there, kid. You're going to have to put in some extremely biased work in order to get those clueless fools to follow you into the loins of battle. But how do I do that? Or where do I start, you may ask? Propaganda's a great start. Propaganda, like I said, has been around for thousands of years. And if you have access to the internet or a television, you've probably came across an example. So for today's episode, we're going to do a deep dive into the intricate world of propaganda and where we can see it proudly displayed in pop culture. HAIL HYDRA!
I like the HAIL HYDRA finisher.
Yeah.
The propaganda is funny, man, because we obviously live in a very emotionally, politically, culturally charged world of today. So I feel like the accusation of propaganda is thrown around like everything. Everything's propaganda. Anything you don't like, anything you're not familiar with, got to be propaganda. And I also think that legitimate propaganda is probably more prevalent than it ever has been with the advent of the internet, right? Because there's just so much information out there. It's so hard to triangulate what is actually the truth and what is propaganda. If you don't know, propaganda, the basic definition of propaganda is it's information disseminated, put out there, especially if it's biased or misleading, used to promote or publicize either a political cause or movement, a point of view, some point of view, basically. But specifically propaganda is when it's biased or misleading, when there's some sort of basically untrue or a dishonest element to it, like a movie poster, or we'll talk about it. But not everything's propaganda. Yeah. Propaganda has a specific definition, but it also has been used very effectively and continues to be to this day, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, highlighting the point where it's especially of use and a bias in misleading nature. So, I mean, there can be truth to propaganda, but I feel like it's that not 360-degree eye of truth. So they highlight one specific truth within the means of their movement, but then tend to block out all opposing views or other truths that may, counter what they're going off of. So you're pretty much just like sinking the eye, or just like collapsing view of what's going on in order to promote an ideal,
right?
And we've been doing it for thousands of years, and in our industry, the industry of war and business is booming. Propaganda is basically riding alongside since pretty much World War I and earlier causes too.
Yeah.
We've seen the posters, we've seen the films. We said this on the podcast before, like all pro-war movies are anti-war movies, all anti-war movies are pro-war movies.
Right.
If it gives you an idea of war and you look, and after it you're like, I want to enlist in the military, you just watched a propaganda film. Or if you watch a war film and it's like, I don't want to enlist in the military, you just watched a propaganda film.
Well, see, that's kind of it's a hard call, man, sometimes, because I think, like, especially when it comes to movies particularly, there's a lot of different elements at play. So obviously somebody wants to tell a story, so there could be like universal kind of elements of humanity, about loyalty or friendship, and then they put it within the backdrop of a movie, or rather a war or a battle. And maybe they might even tell like accurate or true things that happen, like with Black Hawk Down, And then it might, maybe you could call something like that, like it might have like propagandistic elements to it. I don't know that I'd go so far as to say that like, the movie could be called propaganda. Sure. Because remember, it's specifically designed. Propaganda specifically has a biased or misleading nature to it. I mean, we could blow it up and say like everything's biased because you're never going to get the full picture of anything in any moment. Like, this conversation, nobody saw, what we were saying afterwards, or nobody saw what we were saying before. Nobody's going to see what we're saying afterwards. We're not going to give the whole story for any of the examples that we're, what I think is important is to like really narrow the focus about what we're saying propaganda is. And then I think we're doing people a service of like not saying, like not giving the impression that we think like everything can be propaganda, because it's specifically designed to try to get you to think a certain way, to get you have a certain point of view at the expense of kind of the larger truth. Like it's intentional, right?
Yeah. Like it could be used, for example, historically as a recruiting tool.
Yeah.
Like, not necessarily as a means of like swaying public opinion, but also, I mean, there's elements to it. But I mean, some of the most famous examples of propaganda throughout history, and if you've had any interest in the military or U.S. history in general, you've probably seen some of these posters that are great examples of propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird when I say propaganda because it seems to have a negative connotation to it when you use it. But like it can also be used in a good thing. It can also be used, to unite countries. And the example here is the Uncle Sam "I Want You" for the U.S. Army poster during World War I.
Right.
Like that was a great recruiting tool. You were talking about this before the podcast. I kind of want you to elaborate between advertisement and propaganda and the difference between the two, because some would say they're very similar and almost one in the same.
Right.
There's a negative advertisement, there's slander campaigns, there's, advertisements that, sometimes I would even consider the Uncle Sam poster a piece of advertisement for recruiting.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's still technically propaganda.
Well, I guess advertising is more, the purpose of advertising is any technique, any kind of multimedia technique, designed to get you to buy something, a good or a service or something like that. So that's like kind of encompasses all of it. They can use propagandistic techniques, right? They can use styles of propaganda in order to achieve that goal. So I guess advertising, the goal is to get you to buy a good or service. Something that is separate from that could be called propaganda is deliberately misleading or sometimes actually just false in order to entice you or to convince you of a political goal. Mostly that's where we see a lot of propaganda, and then or to convince you of some like cultural movement, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So like for example, in this article I read, there were different techniques for it's propaganda, but it's been used in advertising. It's been used in politics too, but maybe once you recognize them, or once we talk about them a little bit, which we can do right now, then you start seeing them everywhere. Like there's 8 techniques in this article I read. Card stacking, testimonial, bandwagon, stereotyping, transfer technique, glittering generalities, fear appeals, and plain folks. And maybe some of you already are kind of recognizing like some of them, like card stacking, for example, is advertising that intentionally accentuates one point while downplaying the others in order to create a blind spot. You know what I mean? It prioritizes the positive over the negative, and it's similar to trying to use a finger bandage to hide a large cut on your leg when frequently customers are unaware there's even a cut. So like it's like, I don't know, it's like the example they give is like there's these French fries, right? And they're looking so good, and they're saying they got the big taste, 40% less fat, 30% less calories. They're saying, oh, you're thinking like, oh, it's 40% less fat, 30% less calories. It's like fries aren't good for you, period, right? They're made with like bad oils, they're starches, right? So like they're all of a sudden like trying to make it sound like it's some sort of health food when that's not the point of eating fries in the first place, or like testimonials, where this we get used a lot. We'll talk about this later. Like where they get somebody who's like trustworthy or seemingly trustworthy, like a politician or a celebrity, to endorse or to be associated with the product that they want you to buy, and so that gives like an air of legitimacy to the product. It's like having Tom Cruise hold up a can of deodorant or whatever. It's like
having an Olympian on the box of Wheaties saying they ate this and that's how they were able to win a gold medal.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, you got it. And then bandwagon's just like, hey, everybody's doing it. Why don't you?
Cigarettes.
Yeah. So there's all
even doctors smoke Camel.
Exactly. Stereotyping is oversimplifying one aspect. Like when you see I don't think it happens too much anymore, but you see like for a vacuum advertisement, and it's like the housewife, and it's like, look how great she is. She's this beautiful housewife, when that's not typically the case in most households today. But transfer technique, we'll just go through these real quick. And it aims to unjustifiably link the audience's good associations to a totally unrelated idea. Like there's the George Washington Challenger commercial, the Dodge Challenger commercial, and so it's George Washington. He's got a flag on the Dodge Challenger and he's riding it across the battlefield, so immediately you associate the Dodge Challenger with like this patriotism in America, and George Washington is like totally ridiculous, but that's what they want you to associate their car with, right? So that's why glittering generalities, adopting a sparkling generality is always a good way to persuade an audience to support a particular notion, idea. Dazzling generality is a nebulous feel-good phrase that appeals to people's desire to identify with that. It connects them in terms of their beliefs that they already currently hold. So like Pepsi, that's what I like. It's like, okay, you like Pepsi. That's great. That's great. Like I want to like Pepsi great. Too, Fear appeal is, anything that makes you afraid, that's going to want to make you maybe like buy that product, like the prepper meals, it's like, oh, America's in peril. Are you going to be prepared?
Natural disasters.
Yeah, exactly. Now buy our 20-year, preserved foods or whatever. And then plain folks is like, hey, regular people like you love this product, right? It's just like, like if you're just like this peanut butter, man, middle America, good old mom and pop, kind of images and stuff.
Planet Fitness.
Yeah.
We're not,
yeah, exactly.
Planet Fitness. We're for the average person.
Average Joes. Yeah, average Joes. Yeah. Exactly. Just a regular dude. So, it's all this kind of stuff that's, a lot of it I feel like, when it comes to propaganda and advertising, it appeals to emotion, or it tries to like we talked about, it emphasizes one thing so that you'll hopefully like ignore anything else, or it just makes associations that have nothing to do with the product, how well the product works, or who this person is, like the politician. They just want you to associate it with something that you already think is good, like, patriotism or good health or whatever, So it's crazy. It's very psychological.
Yeah, extremely psychological. And I mean, speaking of psychological, the military has an entire unit dedicated to psychological operation warfare.
Right.
And I mean, we could talk about that for a little bit. I mean, masters of propaganda, because propaganda is used in the military vastly.
Yeah.
Obviously, propaganda and psychological warfare, or in the military we call it psyops, it's a force multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
If you can sway the public opinion of the country or the people you're trying to go against, like for example in Afghanistan, the Taliban are an ununiformed force. You can't tell who's good and bad, but your main asset or something that can really help you is the local populace.
Yeah.
So, being in special forces, about this all too well.
Yep.
And the PSYOP units in the U.S. Army fall under SOCOM, so U.S. Special Operations Command, and typically they're a part of Special Forces Group. Then they work very closely with like civil affairs, and they are special operations, quote unquote. We know the truth, PSYOP people. You like to call yourself. We'll let you have it, but we all know.
Well, no,
You're not
real.
SOP.
You're not special.
You're not SOP. But
You're
yeah,
not
you're not
SOP.
special operations. But there's a couple different units within the military. Each branch has there, but since we're both Army guys, might as well talk about the PSYOP units within the Army.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the 2nd, you have the 4th Airborne, you have the 7th, and you have the 8th Airborne Psychological Operations Group. The 2nd and 7th are reservist units, so the 4th and the 8th are the only active duty units, and that's why their designators airborne. And that's why the other two aren't, because I guess the reservist PSYOP guys aren't airborne. I could be wrong, but this is just from my research. And we've dedicated an entire unit to psychological warfare, just because that's how important it is, especially since it is U.S. SOCOM and they work closely with special forces. It makes complete sense to have experts in psychological warfare, with special forces, which ultimately their main mission set is force multiplication and training and creating militaries from local populace. So I mean, that's super cool. I've seen PSYOP people, I've seen them do their job. They use propaganda as a great tool when they're creating their products, because there is an operation, there's like a PSYOP operation that has there's a couple different phases of it, but obviously product development is within that.
Yeah.
So, analyzing the local populace, seeing what they like, seeing what they don't like, creating a product, whether that's, leaflets, like I've seen in my military experience with North Korea when I was in South Korea. They also use loudspeakers, they drop pamphlets, they drop, all sorts of information within the language of the populace. They're trying to, I don't want to say manipulate, but sway.
I think manipulate's a good word.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Within, they're trying to manipulate and get them on their side. I think it's a really cool unit, because like just the word PSYOP.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, I'm part of psychological operations, and you're like, don't read my mind.
You wish it was the men who stare at goats thing, don't you?
Yeah,
Psychological
exactly. Like when I think of
operations.
PSYOPs. Yeah, when I think of PSYOPs, I immediately think of psychics.
Yeah,
and like
Psy
the men who stare at
operators.
goats.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
cool.
they're just in there freaking holding their temples.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a very interesting gig. Like, I'll go back to my example of when I was in South Korea. North Korea and South Korea definitely play the PSYOP game.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the DMZ is the Wild West.
Yeah.
And, although it's in the East, I say Wild West because, like, it was something I've never seen before, ever, or could even fathom how, like, they would go about their business. Because when I was in South Korea, it was during 2016 when they kind of had that nuclear scare threat for North Korea.
Yeah.
When they were starting to do their ballistic missiles. So we deployed there to act as a QRF, but to also participate in one of the largest joint training international exercises that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
So pretty much it was a show of force.
That's a PSYOP right there.
Yeah, that's a PSYOP in general. And so it was a show of force to North Korea, saying, because obviously they have spies and assets watching. Yep. And it's like, okay, we just are pulling together the biggest military exercise. So if you mess around, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. And so honestly, it was so cold. It was such a bad. Yeah, fighting in Korea, that place is a desolate, mountainous, just disgusting place. Yeah. But at the DMZ, we were stationed at Warrior Base, which was about 1,000 meters, pretty damn close to the border of North Korea and South Korea, which is the DMZ. And at nighttime, you would hear a ginormous loudspeaker. And I don't know if they like took turns, but one night it would be North Korean propaganda being shouted by a guy, like it was a recording of a dude screaming in Korean, just like, I had no idea what he's saying, but I could assume it was just like, calling them traitors, saying, North Korea is the ultimate power in the world and whatnot. And then the next night, South Korea, being the ultimate trolls they are, would just blast K-pop back at them. And so, it wasn't good for me because I wanted to sleep, and this was echoing throughout the night. But that was one example of it. And then another example is we mentioned leaflets, which are kind of like paper pamphlets with, like, political cartoons on them, information.
Yeah.
Basically, wherever they drop this, when people pick it up, they read it and they go, "Huh, oh, that's interesting."
Like in Dunkirk, in the beginning of the movie, you see the English soldiers walking through town, and they get the leaflets, and all the leaflets say, "You're surrounded, like we're coming to get you."
Yeah,
that's like psyops right
exactly.
there,
Yeah, it's like if you do X, there will be Y. If you don't do X, there will be Y.
Yeah.
So that's like a classic example. But yeah, I remember if you're part of our Patreon, I went ahead. I had pictures of those leaflets I found.
Oh, nice.
My team found while doing land navigation on the near the DMZ, and yeah, they totally drop them. They're still out there, and I posted a couple pictures of them for our Patreon members, but they were like pictures of it was let's see, it was like nuclear bombs being launched at the White House. There was like the U.S. Capitol building like on fire.
Nice.
There was another one of because Obama was president at the time when I was there. There was one of like Obama licking the feet of the South Korean president at the time, and like it was absolutely crazy. Or I think it was roles reversed. Like the South Korean president was like licking the feet of President Obama at the time, just to show like she's not in control of her own country.
She's a
being
puppet
swayed
state
by
or something.
Yeah, just a puppet being swayed by Western influence, which is the greatest evil in the world. And like they're absolutely crazy. And you pick these things up and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like and they work because they have a dedicated populace. If they're not trying to escape, they are serving the supreme leader.
Dude, North Korea, I feel like if we talk about them for a little bit, because they are kind of a time capsule, right? Because they're hardcore communists. I mean, we could talk about the forms that communism takes today, but they are like old school Cold War era communists, and they get a lot of their cues from, Stalin and Lenin style communism, from like the era of Russian, like the hardcore Russian state communism. Because you look at a lot of their propaganda is really for their people, right? To keep their people in line, to keep their people brainwashed, to create the sense of party identity and party loyalty, and everything from like public service announcements about like what plants they should be planting, or how their responsibility is to the party, or what a great nation North Korea is. I mean, this stuff's everywhere. If you watch any kind of documentaries on North Korea and the footage that they get out, it's not just like giant statues of like Kim Jong-un and like the hammer and sickle in Times Square or whatever, or like in the middle of the square. It's like all these posters all around, and it just never stops, because that's what you got to have in a country like North Korea in order to maintain control over the populace, is not just physical totalitarianism, where they obviously they have the military and they have a police state, but you got to have psychological, you got to do some psyops and some propaganda, not just to keep them in line with fear, but like hey, we're an amazing country and we got it the best here, and nobody else has it as good as we do, and look at all the prosperity, and you should be so thankful, and yada yada. They even got, I was doing a little research, they even have some YouTube influencers. They got this little girl.
Is that the musician?
I don't know if it's the musician, but it's a little girl who speaks, actually she's has a British accent, and she goes around and does like little activities. It's more designed to tell the world that North Korea it's just like everywhere else. It's just like here. It's just like America. And so they have this little girl, and then an older girl, like a teenager, who she's like, I'm just a regular person. I'm so excited for the new soccer season to come up, and they show all these wherever they're at. I'm sure, like one of them's the little girl at like an amusement park. And that they hired actors and they corralled people, and then they turned all the rides on, and then immediately when they were done filming, they turned all that stuff off, because Korea is notorious for having a shortage of like supplies and food and power.
Yeah. They can't be wasting all that water on fun.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like it's this kind of like weird step where like I don't even think YouTube is allowed in Korea, or like they don't have the real internet.
Cell phones are a thing.
Yeah, because they can't let information
that's
get
crazy.
out.
That's absolutely How do they do that? That must be a government sponsored.
Totally.
Effort.
No,
Like,
the one little girl, or I forget which one of them, but like her father is like works for like the Ministry of Information, and then like his father was like a famous general in the party, so she's totally connected.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah, there's no way they would let
'Cause,
some random girl do it.
Yeah, and there's no way that like the viewers are coming from North Korea.
Right.
Because like, yeah, maybe they'll like show that on North Korean television because they have complete control of what goes on there. But there's no way that like North Koreans are on YouTube, because then they'd see the rest of the world and realize how bad they have it. Like there's
no,
like,
they would never let it. Yeah, this is like
that is propaganda directed to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, there's one thing about, I mean, just going off on a rant on like communism, like communist states, if there's one thing that they are obsessed with, it's their image. It's their public image and how and saving face and making everything look good, because you got to make the party look good, because the party is basically God, when it comes to communism. It's all about the party.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you can get people on board, because once you see what communism truly is, and this is not just the patriot in me talking, because if better dead than red, you know what I'm saying? but it's not a good move.
No,
it's not a good move at all.
Cameron, don't you understand? Real communism has never been tried. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just never it's never actually been properly implemented, which is why we get these states that the way that, but if it was properly implemented,
like Marx had in mind, if we really followed his formula, we would all be happy and sleeping in we just haven't done it right. Yeah, no, that blows my mind that they are on YouTube. That's a good find, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's so crazy.
Yeah, North Korea is another thing, but like, as we go through and we look at history and propaganda implementing, like you can see, back in the day before TVs, it was all radio and media. Yep. It was like leaflets and radio. And then as we get technologically more advanced, you start to see like, Hollywood getting involved. And it's funny because like, even though North Korea, you mentioned they have like, the Bureau of Information that pretty much funnels all their stuff. So I was researching, and America had that too.
Oh, really?
And it was kind of crazy. So like during World War I and World War II, obviously film in Hollywood was the best way at the time to reach massive audiences, instead of going door to door like a salesman and dropping off your going face to face with your politician. So they'd utilize Hollywood to create propaganda pieces. And at the time, during World War II, this is a big push. Obviously there was a great sense of pride to defeat the Nazis, because they were the true evil of the world at the time. Yeah. And so the government partnered with Hollywood, and they established a Office of War Administration, which filtered all information that was released about the war. So, and then they also established the Bureau of Motion Pictures, which both these worked very closely, and they decided which motion pictures about war would be shown to the public. Because obviously now you kind of have more free game, because that war is over and done with, but you have like anti-war pieces being made about like how war in general is bad, but back then it was all positive. It was like, no, this war is good, and you need to sign up and buy your bonds, otherwise Captain America won't be able to lift his shield. And it was absolutely crazy. But yeah, there was a lot of really good propaganda films just in each war, war of history. Like starting out in World War I, when film kind of came out, and it was like this big. It wasn't just going to the movie theaters. It was an entire production. You had no audio, so you had an entire band playing music within the theater. People would go, and it was super interactive. Old-timey. And it was like, it was like going to it was like going to a musical. And I would never go if that was good. But like in World War I, you had great propaganda pieces like the Battle of Somme, which came out Somme, which came out in 1916, which was a British piece of propaganda about World War I, basically trench warfare, fighting the Germans in the name of Britain. Trying to rid the world of their evil. And then World War II, it doesn't always necessarily need to be a drama. Sometimes these propaganda pieces can be comedies. Like speaking of North Korea, what was
The Interview?
The Interview was an amazing movie. And that pissed off North Korea for a while.
Yeah, they had this whole thing like that they were going to retaliate if it was released, and I think didn't Hollywood listen? Like they didn't release it for a long time. They finally did eventually, but it was going to be
What are they
released,
gonna
and
do?
they got
They're all
pushed back.
Yeah, all their bombs landed in the ocean. Like, let us know when you have real missiles, not made of cardboard. Yeah, so like in World War II, Charles Chaplin, the great dictator.
Charlie
was,
Chaplin,
like,
yeah, that's
considered-
right. That was his first. I think that was his first audio film with like actual
Oh, was
dialogue
it?
and stuff. Yeah, because obviously films were silent pictures back then. But I think The Great Dictator was his first. You guys can check me on that in the comments. But
Check them.
yeah.
Because I don't know. But when it came out, it wasn't intended to be a propaganda piece. You know when you like write a book, or I've never written a book, neither have you. But you know, like when you go through, it could have been an example of this scenario. Like in school, you like in English class, you would be like reading this book, and you'd read a paragraph, and the teacher would be like, "What are they trying to say?" Like there's like they have this idea that there's meaning behind every single word in this novel. And sometimes it seems like people fabricate so much in their mind based off what's written and like come up with these ideas and think like the person's a genius for doing it. But, you know, often not. It might not be the case. They just wanted to write a book. So that when The Great Dictator was released, there was no propaganda message behind it. It was just a comedy. But like everybody else was like, that's propaganda and we love it. And yeah, like Britain labeled it a propaganda, and Charles Chaplin actually came out and was just like, no, it was just a comedy. But I mean, take it for whatever it is.
Yeah, you know, it's hard, man, because sometimes, you know, like you say, sometimes people are intending to make a movie with some sort of commentary, and that could get totally lost in like the current cultural movement. I feel like a lot of war movies, it's hard because you know that today, a lot of movies can get a lot of resources. They can get access to bases and equipment and men. If they agree to certain terms that the U.S. government or the Department of Defense will lay out in portraying the military in a certain way. You know, like Michael Bay, whatever you think about his movies, he has always been one of those directors who portrays the military in a positive light. And so as a result, he gets so much access to so many resources from the Army and the Navy, from the military, and I'm sure he's got them like on speed dial because he's done so many movies like that overtly show the military in just a positive light, and so I'm sure that there's a little bit of propagandistic, is that a word? Tendencies.
It is now.
When it comes to war films, because I'm sure the temptation is strong for, even if you have a movie that maybe is about, you know, like Restrepo or whatever, or is that's a documentary?
That's a documentary.
Anyway, or The Outpost, where you want to tell this really heart-wrenching story, this really serious story about this, you know, soldiers and this amazing, you know, battle where 2 medals of honor were given, and it's not going to be easy, but you want to get those resources, you want to get the military vehicles and all, you know, that maybe the military could provide. I'm sure you could rent this stuff as well, but I'm sure the temptation is there, and I'm sure there are plenty of movies out there that the military did not approve that were made anyway, because they're like, oh god, this makes us look like horrible people, you know.
Yeah, or documentary TV shows like Surviving the Cut, 8 Weeks in Hell. Ranger Regiment hated that documentary.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it made Rasp look super easy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no. But I mean, speaking of that, like the next example moving down the lines of history, like going into Vietnam, the movie Green Berets, 1968 with John Wayne.
Yeah.
So I guess when they were creating this movie, because it was right when the Vietnam War was taking off for the U.S., and like obviously in that period of time, there was a real negative connotation with the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I guess this is allegedly what happened. John Wayne personally wrote a letter to President Lyndon B. Johnson at the time for approval to make the money and to star in it himself because he was pro-military. So he wanted to, like, you know, show. Obviously, it was a draft, but in Vietnam, was it a draft? No, it was volunteer.
It was draft in Vietnam, yeah.
There was a draft in Vietnam. Draft in Vietnam. So it's going to be like, okay, well, if I can make a movie showing like how amazing the military is and what this special unit does and how much they help the people, like maybe these people who get drafted, won't think twice about what they're doing or like want to be there because they know they're doing some positive stuff. But then
That's
you
funny.
but then you have movies like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket that are just like, oh my god,
Yeah.
the atrocities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Green Berets, I think it's a fun film. You can definitely tell it's biased toward the Green Berets.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely highlights them and makes them seem amazing and all the things that it kind of goes.
They not amazing.
They are. No, they are. It's a 100% accurate movie, but you can still tell, like, and I guess that's kind of one of the double-edged sword aspects of propaganda is that what if it's for a good cause? Like, what if it's for, some, they had like, I'm having trouble coming up with an example. What if you have like a social issue and you really want to push this one aspect of why it's good to have this change in society, right? And then you don't really necessarily tell the whole story about it. But
Sure.
Hey, you know what? If it gets people to kind of go in that direction, then maybe the goal is worth what do they call it? The ends justify the means, kind of thing.
Is that what would you consider that under your examples of types of propaganda when you were mentioning earlier? Would that be the glittering generalities?
Yeah, I think that would be like only like showing glittering generalities. I also, there's definitely a lot of bandwagon. There's the testimonials, people, getting celebrities to endorse a movement or an idea, and it's just like, well, hey, Tom Cruise likes this thing, why don't you? It's like, well, I like Tom Cruise, therefore I should like that thing, and it's a lot of times it's relentless and consistent and persistent, right? You may see it in a show, all the time, and it's just a subtle kind of thing, right? Like there was a lot of back in like shows like Star Trek, right? Well, I'm not sure that's because I actually agree with this. Having Uhura, right, in the original Star Trek, a black woman, communications officer, and then they got an Asian guy in there as well. It's like a multi-ethnic crew, and I'm sure back then he was like saying like, listen, we can have this. This is what the future looks like. It was also pretty Marxist too, because like we don't have money anymore because we're the Federation and we don't need it, but. Also, it's like we're out exploring the universe together. We've put our differences aside. And maybe that's not a good example of propaganda because that's actually, I think, just like a good thing, like 'cause people are people, and stuff. So so maybe we can throw that example aside. But
except for stolen valor people, those people don't mean anything.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we can totally marginalize those people.
There's some examples you put down here back in the day for smoker campaigns.
Yeah.
I absolutely love them because the big tobacco back in the day was absolutely relentless.
Yep.
Like, there's literally, it's a picture of a doctor in a white coat and he has a cigarette in his hand. And it says, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Yeah.
I love that, man. Yeah, because it's like it's that association with the doctor. It's like, oh, doctors do it. Doctors smoke. I like how it's like more doctors
are
smoke
healthy,
Camels,
Yeah, Camels. That's the doctor's favorite cigarette. Yeah. And then more ad campaigns down here. Oh, it seems like Camels have been doing it right. Like Camel advertisement is A1 back in the day. Like they have the Camel mascot. He's in a fighter jet uniform, and it says smooth character, and he has a Camel cigarette, and there's a fighter jet in the background with the lovely lady wearing a flight jacket. And it's just like, it's like Top Gun if if the movie was about smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if this particular ad came out in the 80s around that time, because Top Gun, we could say that was like a recruiting tool for the Navy or Air Force, people who wanted to fly jets, because it just associated that activity, that job in the military with just like cool looking people. And so I'm sure Camel wanted to get in on that action a little bit. And, big tobacco has been guilty of propaganda for many a year. And now it's going the other way. Now there's all these anti-tobacco campaigns that I'm sure it's a good cause, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of propaganda associated with that. Not telling the whole story. I haven't done a lot of research, so you guys don't quote me on that. But it's easy. It's easy to kind of slip into that. It's easy to kind of, if you want to like push your agenda, it's easy to just tell one aspect of it and be like, that's it. That's the whole story. But unfortunately, in life, things tend to be a little more complicated than that. Historically, culturally,
No, absolutely. You're definitely right. Well, I mean, hell, we talked a lot about propaganda here. It's definitely an intricate sector. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to propaganda, and it's like just as prevalent today as it was back in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, especially with the advancement of like social media and just the reach.
Yeah.
I mean, the North Koreans aren't going to be seeing any of the American propaganda because they don't have cell phones,
yeah.
but they're doing what they need to do with their social media influencers, which is I still can't get over that.
Dude,
it's nuts.
You got to evolve those tactics, man. You got to stay relevant.
Stay relevant. Well, we got a fan question.
Yeah. This fan question is from Samuel Jackson. It's not to be confused with Samuel L. Jackson. This Jackson spelled with the Jackson. So not unfortunately.
Cool name. Yeah, almost there.
Maybe someday he will listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
But,
the parents knew what they were doing.
Samuel Jackson asks, do you have something from your childhood that someone got you to believe, and then when you grew up, you found out it actually wasn't true? Sometimes, we grow up thinking things, and then we go back and examine them like, where did I hear that? Is that even true? And then you go and you research it. Like, like when you think some celebrity's dead, and you're like, no, no, they've been alive this whole time.
Yeah, no, I feel like that happens more times than anything. Because when you're young, you believe anything, especially if your parent tells you.
Yeah.
Like, your parent is a superhuman. Your parent is God to you. And, like, they can do no wrong. And then you come out to find out, and you're like, my life was a lie. I have a classic example of that. I mean, obviously, everybody probably was told Santa Claus exists.
Yep.
Like, that's a classic example.
Yep.
And some people still believe. I still believe. Just because I want really expensive things for Christmas, and I know my fiance can't afford it. So I'm crossing my fingers for a miracle.
Please, Santa.
But when I was young, my mother was very good friends. Like, how sometimes when you grow up, you someone in your life, they call them an aunt or an uncle, but they're not actually.
Yeah.
You don't really find out until later.
Yep.
But they're just really good friends of your parents. So my mother had a really good girlfriend who was Filipino, and we would always hang out with them. And, they would always mention Filipino because I love Filipinos. They have a very proud heritage. They love being Filipino. It's awesome. And so she was on the phone one day, and I remember we were in a department store, and we were walking around, and I was just, she was on the phone with this lady, and they were talking about being Filipino. And I went up to my mom, and I was like, Mom, am I Filipino? Because she's at the time, what I thought was my aunt. So I'm like, we're related. So does that mean I'm Filipino? And then she just did the old parent, like, not paying attention, where she just, like, waves you off and goes, yeah. Like, not paying attention to what you're saying. So for years, I'm saying years, I thought I was Filipino. And, like, I don't look Filipino at all. So when people ask me, like, oh, what are you? Like, what ethnicity are you? I'd be like, Filipino. And they'd always, look at me like I'm crazy. To come to find out, like, I was talking with my mom about it again, and I was just like, yeah, so we came from we're Filipino, right? And she's like, what? Who told you that? And I was like, you did. Yeah, so I would say that's a good example of one that's, like, very just front of my brain, but I'm sure there's other things that, I thought were true that aren't. What about you, buddy?
Oh man, it's tough. I'm trying to think of a good example. There's, like, wrong information that you just grow up with and you don't know where you got it from. Like, I was doing some research for our upcoming episode for Duels, talking about Darth Vader. The episode where Return of the Jedi, Luke takes off Darth Vader's masks, and it's a guy there. I always thought that was Frank Oz. Like, I don't know what Frank Oz looks like. Frank Oz is the voice of Yoda.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, they got that actor to go and do just this little small part. But it's not. It's an actor called Sebastian Shaw. And that's, they didn't let David Prowse, who was the body, for the actor for Darth Vader to do it because he was British and he kind of have a British voice, It didn't really line up with the deep Darth Vader, the James Earl Jones who had done the voice of Darth Vader. So as an actor, Sebastian Shaw, and it's just like all that I've told people like, oh, that was Frank Oz, I've like disseminated this misinformation out there for decades.
Spread propaganda.
I'm like, wait, that was just some actor, Sebastian Shaw. He was a British actor, had a good career. And then he was, of course, the ghost. That was the ghost of him at the end of the movie. But it's just like a little thing like that. And it just makes me question other information that I've taken for granted that I knew that I probably didn't know. Yeah, ultimately.
Yeah, like girls don't poop.
Man, who are you listening to when you were a kid?
Oh man, it was an inside joke, but like
girls don't poop.
Forever, young kids, young boys, we're told girls don't poop. Like ever.
I thought they say they don't fart. Yeah, girls don't fart. I heard that.
Girls don't fart. You never heard the girls don't poop. I guess my group was a little bit more
extreme,
a little bit more extreme in their beliefs. But yeah, girls don't poop. It's a thing. Still believe that. Well, we hope we answered your question there, Sam Jackson. Keep living life with that awesome name.
You're destined for greatness. Yes,
destined for greatness with a name like that. But as we wrap up the podcast, we got a game for you as always.
I have a game for you, Cameron. And this game is called Commie or Good Ol U.S. of A. I'm gonna test your mind poisoning knowledge of propaganda with this game. I'm going to read you a propaganda slogan, and you tell me if this is something that the USSR was peddling or it was a little home-baked propaganda. Because the U.S. is not immune from using propaganda. I'm sure a lot of you can think of examples of U.S. propaganda. By the way, before we begin, small thing that we didn't get to today, the Rosie the Riveter poster that is very popular today, the We Can Do It, the woman kind of holding her arm, she's got the bonnet, that's actually not Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter, it was a Norman Rockwell painting that you can go look up, like the real Rosie the Riveter, and it's a really cool, she's kind of a more buff chick. She's got a riveter on her lap, she's holding a sandwich, and her feet are on top of a Mein Kampf book. And it was made back in the 40s. The Rosie the Riveter, the popularized one, was actually it was in a factory, and it was actually lost for a long time, and then kind of got brought back. But the We Can Do It one was actually, it was like just in this like local factory. It was the if I can find it real quick, it was inside of a factory, the Westinghouse factory. Westinghouse employees in the Midwest during a interweek period in 1943. So that one is actually not Rosie the River. The real Rosie the River was a Saturday Evening Post piece of art done by Norman Rockwell. Anyway, on to the actual propagandistic. I'm going to use that so much now in my life.
Propagandistic.
Okay, I got it right. So anyway, this is the warm-up, man. Which slogan? USSR or all good old American?
All right.
Workers of the world, unite.
Workers of the world, unite. I'm pretty sure that's a commie thing because they're built on... Actually, I'm going to say it's a commie thing because, they're all working class technically.
Good instincts, man. Yeah, communism is all about the worker, the common people, the class warfare between the bourgeoisie and the workers. That's
everybody's working class.
Yeah, everybody's anybody who's not a capitalist or really rich is the people. All right, good, man. Good instincts. Keep going with that, man. Let's go to number 1. Are you ready?
I am ready to go. Let's do it.
To have more, we must produce more. To produce more, we must know more. So the whole slogan is, to have more, we must produce more. To produce more, we must know more.
To have more, we must produce more. To produce more, we must have more. Having, I don't know. That's a tough one. Chris, this is a toughie, dude. These slogans, because they can go both ways. Because to have more, we must produce more. That's obviously from a working level. To produce more, we must know more. But that's a very capitalistic mindset, but then not very communistic because they want to keep everybody dumb. But that's just my patriot brain saying that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that's United States propaganda.
Oh, that is a USSR slogan.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know the origins of that, but I mean, I guess it makes sense because it's all about production, producing more and stuff. Like, I don't know who they want to get to know more, because I'm sure that they're not about the workers, like, knowing more, because then they might rise up and take over or whatever.
Yeah, knowledge is the best weapon.
Yeah. All right, so you didn't get that one, but you might get this one.
That's okay.
The next one is loose lips sink ships. Loose lips sink ships.
Loose lips sink ships. U.S. Navy saying.
Good instincts, man. That is a USA Navy, or USA saying. It's a slogan from the U.S. Yeah.
Very. Loose lips sink ships, man. I always say that. Quote me. I always say that.
All right, good one. You're one for 1 and 1. Next one coming up. The enemy laughs when you loaf.
The enemy laughs when you loaf.
As in, I think loaf by I mean like slack off or don't do.
Yeah,
don't
slack
work.
off. That's a very Russian thing to say. I feel like that's a super Russian thing to say. So I'm going to say it's the USSR at the time.
That is, in fact, a American slogan.
Wow.
Actually, the enemy laughs when you loaf. I suppose when, to looking at the poster here, we've got really stereotypical racists like China or Japan, and you got Hitler there, and you got Mussolini maybe. I don't know who that is, but they're laughing at a little guy doing some fishing, and he's not doing his job, so they're laughing.
He's not doing his job. Wow.
Yeah.
These are very similar. Like, they can go both ways. This is very challenging.
Yeah. Well, let's see if you can recognize the next one. The next one is to fly higher than all, farther than all, faster than all.
Oh, that's the end of the saying?
Yeah. To fly higher than all, farther than all, faster than all.
Further, faster, further, higher, faster. I'm just going to say that's a good old American saying. That sounds pretty American.
Very similar, but not quite. This is a Russian saying.
God damn,
it's a poster
dude, this is
of a Russian.
tough game.
It's a Russian pilot, and he's flying into the sky, surrounded by other Russian jets. Looks like MiGs or whatever. But it is similar to further, faster. Higher, further, faster, higher. But
Further, faster, stronger.
Yeah, there you go. To fly higher, further than all, faster than all. That's the full slogan for the Russian propaganda poster.
Wow. Yeah, this is very tough, man. Seems like I thought it was going to be pretty black and white. But no, it's not.
Just goes to show you, man, propaganda, I feel like it tends to tug on emotions, most of patriotism. You know, there's like certain categories that really lend themselves to propaganda, or that certain go-to attitudes or certain go-to perspectives and attitudes that propaganda really tends to draw from, no matter what country you're from.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. How eye-opening.
You learn.
Do we have any left, or are we wrapped?
We got
two left. Okay, let's see if I can wrap it up. But for the listener, this is challenging. I hope you in your car is doing just as bad as I am, unless you're like a propaganda expert. But let's wrap this up, dude. Let's do it.
2 more. Let's go with this next one. Sub spotted. Let them have it.
Sub spotted. Okay, the Russians were big in the subs. So, but like their threat was big in the subs. So I'm going to say that's an American saying. Final answer. Please tell me yes.
Yes, that's correct.
God.
Good one.
Yeah, that's some Red October.
Yeah. I feel like that's like very American. Like, let them have it. Let those commies have it.
Yeah, there's a sub.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, you got that one, Cam. Let's see if you can finish strong. If you do a pointless chat, you are helping a spying rat.
Ooh, that's toughy, because that's like OPSEC propaganda.
Right.
That's like loose lips sink ships.
Yeah, if you do a pointless chat, you are helping a spying rat.
I feel like it's a very Russian thing to say. Spying rat.
You're
a spying rat.
Spying capitalist rat.
Spying capitalistic rat. A little chat? But chat is very English. Like, I don't think... I'm going to say it's American.
Oh, Cameron, it is a USSR slogan. There is a poster
No.
of a gentleman with a monocle, actually, being whispered
Monopoly
to in
Man.
the ear by somebody else who's kind of pointing like, hey, did you hear what this guy did? Did you hear what this capitalist dog did over here? And that's the poster where we get the saying from. It's
Wow.
funny because if you look at the poster, it doesn't look like there's enough lettering for the actual long sentence of if you do a pointless chat, you're helping inspire math. There's like a couple little letters there. So maybe Cyrillic is a little bit more expressive than I thought it was. But, well, Cameron, you didn't do very well, but hopefully you learned a lot.
I did. You know, the greatest trait you can have is to take feedback and learn from your failure.
Absolutely.
So I did learn a lot from my failure, and I will move on, and I will become the world's greatest expert in all things propaganda slogans. So thank you for that. Thank you for creating a massively hard game.
Go against
Chris.
the grain.
That was, even though I completely failed, it was a good time.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode, folks. We really appreciate you joining us. New episodes every Wednesday. Join us on the Patreon if you want more amazing content. And check out YouTube as well. We release visual episodes for your viewing pleasure, and we got a lot more great stuff coming up soon. So thank you so much. Be on the lookout for propaganda, unless you're listening to this episode, on this podcast, in which case everything we say is absolutely 100% accurate. With that being said,
Cue music.